Thank you everyone for joining us. We're ready to learn Parshat Va'eira, amazing lessons that can learn from the Parsha. We'll begin right from the beginning of the Parsha. Shmot, Perek Vav, Pasuk Bet, Vayidaber Elokim El Moshe. Hashem speaks to Moshe, Vayomer Elav Ani Hashem. And he says, I am Hashem. The first reference to Hashem in the Pasuk is Elokim. Elokim is always God's name of harsh, strict justice. And then the second part of the Pasuk switches and he says, Ani Hashem, which is Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is God's name of Rachamim, God's name of mercy. Why does it start with Elokim and then shift to Ani Hashem? Says Rav Moshe Feinstein, we learned a really important lesson over here. Remember that why is God speaking to Moshe? There's some musar here, there's rebuke. Moshe Rabbeinu is complaining about what has happened since he started to try to get the Jews redeemed from Egypt. And he says to Hashem, why have you done this? And now Hashem has to come down hard on Moshe and essentially say, I am God, I'm the one who runs the world, I've got this, I'll take care of it, you have to trust in me. When Hashem gives that rebuke, says Rav Moshe, Venira, when you want to rebuke someone and speak harshly against them, you have to have both aspects. You do have to come down hard sometimes and speak in a harsh manner. And then afterwards, you shift gears and you speak in a more appeasing way. Rav Moshe Feinstein says, any rabbi, any teacher, I'll extend it to any parent, has to learn from this lesson in terms of how Moshe was addressed by Hashem when he was given this rebuke. As the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Kuv Zayin Amabet, L'olam Tehei Smol Doche V'Yamin Mekarevet. On the one hand, you have the left hand, which is pushing the person with the rebuke. By the other hand, you have the right, which is bringing the person in at the same time. We always have to have that duality if we want to be effective. And that is lesson number one from this parsha, to learn from Hashem. On the one hand, it's Elokim with the strict justice. On the other hand, it's also the Hashem, the name of mercy, compassion, of piyus, of appeasement. You have to have both in place when you are giving someone rebuke if you want it to be effective. Let's move on to lesson number two, Shmot Perek Vav, Psukim Vav to Zayin. We have the languages of Geula. We have Hashem saying first, Vehotzeti, I'm going to take the Jews out of Egypt. Vehitzalti, I'm going to save you from Egypt, from your slavery. Vega'alti, I'm going to redeem you from there. And then Velakachti, I'm going to take you to me as a nation. Now, certainly when we have the four kosot at Pesach, we're celebrating these four aspects of the redemption from Egypt. But the Balei Musar say, there's something much deeper happening over here. That yes, we're talking about the actual redemption from Egypt, but there's a message to all of us for life in general. And that is, when we are trying to be better people, what is the process to accomplish that? The Balei Musar say the first one is Behotzeti. You have to stop doing the bad behavior. That's the first step, almost like shock therapy. Just stop what you're involved with. Then Vihitzalti, you can save yourself from what's leading to that bad behavior. First, you stop, then you can be saved from the bad behavior in general. Then Vega'alti, you turn towards the positive side of the redemption and you start doing the positive actions. And once you do that, Velakachti, Hashem will take you to him as someone who has a close relationship with him. These are the four stages of a person's personal redemption as we try to be better people. And as the Gemara says in Masechet Taanit Tet Zayin Amud Aleph, that there's no possible way to redeem yourself as long as you're continuing to do that which is wrong. Adam sheish biyado aveira u'mitvadev ve'eino chozer ba. You confess and you want to try to be better, but you haven't stopped the behavior. Lamahu domer, what do you compare it to? The well-known example of a person who tries to go into the mikveh to purify himself from an impurity, but he's still holding the sheretz, the insect that made him impure, he's still holding it in his hands. Tavel v'sheretz biyado. Tavel v'sheretz biyado. You're going to the mikvah and you still have the sheretz in your hand. Lo also lo tefillah, it doesn't help. But zarko miyado, if you get rid of it, just go into Arbaim Sa, you go to the mikvah, and miyad al lo tefillah. You have the mikvah accomplishes that purification. As David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Lamedalat Vav, sur meira va'aseto. Stop doing that which is bad first, and then start doing the good. And that is lesson number 2 from this week's Parsha. A beautiful idea to learn from the 4 languages of Geulah. We don't usually look at it in this way, but now we can look at it as our path towards personal redemption as well. Stop doing it. Reach out and treat the inherent reason why you were doing it. Turn towards the positive, and then before you know it, you'll have that relationship with Hashem. Lesson number 2 from the Parsha. We go to lesson number 3, and we turn to Shmot Perek Gimel, Psukim Yud Daled through Chaf. I'm not going to read through all the Psukim, but it goes through all the ancestry of Moshe and Aaron, but starts with Ruvain, then it goes to Shimon, then it goes to Levi, goes through details about the family of Levi, leading us to Moshe and Aaron. But if you notice, there's a change which takes place. You have to open up the Chumash and see this. There's a change which takes place when we get to the tribe of Levi. It says, Ve'elu Shmot, B'nei Levi l'toldotam, Gershon Kahatim Merari, and then it actually lists the years of Levi. Sheva Oshlimu Me'ot Shana, he lived for 137 years. Then it tells us the same thing for the next generation, for Kahat, how long he lived. And then it gives the next one for Amram, how long he lived. Why does it do that? For everyone else in this details of the ancestry, it doesn't do so. But for Levi, and then for Kahat, and then for Amram, it gives us the number of years that they lived. Why? Says the Sforno, Aval Levi, Sheherich Yamim al Kulam, Levi lived longer than all the other tribes. So Gidel et Bnei Banav, he taught his grandchildren. Each one of them lived long enough lives to be able to teach to their grandchildren. V'chein Kahat Amram, Ba'ofen Sheyatzu Mehem, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. What a beautiful, beautiful idea in terms of the impact that grandparents, that the earlier generations can have on the younger generations. Because Levi was alive and had an impact, he was involved in the upbringing of his grandchildren. Because Kahat had a similar experience, and Amram, they lived long enough to have the impact that who came from them? Aaron, Moshe, Miriam, that is the impact they were able to have. The concept of teaching our children and our grandchildren, being involved in their upbringing in a positive way, not just being around, but being involved, tremendous results can come from that. It's not always guaranteed. And of course, we could put in all of our best efforts, and we still somehow are not blessed with children and grandchildren who are on the right path. But if we want to do our part, let's be involved. Involved parenting, involved grandparenting, being involved in their lives. That is what the Torah is teaching us by saying the years of Levi, Kahat, and Amram. And that leads us to lesson number 3, where the Torah is teaching us, if you're blessed with those years to be able to be around to see your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, be involved in their lives and have a positive impact, you can play an integral role in terms of how they turn out. Lesson number 3. Lesson number 4, at the very end of that sequence where it talks about all the ancestry going down through Levi, Perek Vav, Pasuk Vav, it says, Hu Aaron u'Moshe. These are Aaron and Moshe who were standing before Paro. Aaron and Moshe, every other time we see the two of them mentioned, it's Moshe first and then Aaron. Why this shift over here? Says the Tosefta in Masechet Kritut, B'chol makom makdamim Moshe la'Aaron. Usually Moshe is before Aaron. Uva makom echad, and in one place, hu omer hu Aaron Moshe. What does that teach us? Says the Tosefta, Melamed sheshnehem shkulim. This comes to teach us that they are both equal. Moshe and Aaron are equal. Even though usually it says Moshe first, in one place it says Aaron first to tell us that they're equal. They're equal. How can we possibly say that Moshe and Aaron are equal? It doesn't make any sense. We know it says straight out at the end of the Torah, in Dvarim Lamadal and Yudvelo Kam Navi Od B'Yisrael, right? Moshe, there was no one like Moshe who saw Hashem face to face. How can it possibly say that they are on the same level? Says Rav Moshe Feinstein. You know why they're on the same level? Yes, it's true. Moshe was the greatest prophet there could ever be. Moshe was closest to Hashem than a person could ever be. But Aaron did everything that he could do in terms of the opportunities that were presented to him, and he worked to reach his potential. Every single one of us, we say in davening, V'tein chalkeinu b'toratecha. Hashem, help me achieve my portion in Torah learning. It could be there are other people who have the ability to achieve greater amounts of Torah learning and higher levels of Torah learning. But I want to reach my potential. I want to achieve what I can be. I want to be the best that I can be. And that is what we learn from it saying Aaron and Moshe together. Yes, it's true. Moshe Rabbeinu was on a higher level and closer to Hashem, but they're equal, because Aaron maximized his potential in terms of what Hashem set forth for him that he could do in this lifetime. And that is lesson number 4, both for ourselves and in terms of what we convey. Don't look at the other person. Look at what I'm able to accomplish. We live in a world where we so often are judging ourselves by others and not judging ourselves by who we can be. Let's get in touch with ourselves and recognize what we can accomplish and make sure that we maximize who we are and not search for, but I didn't reach what this other person reached. Moshe and Aaron were equal. Let's raise our children that way, and let's internalize that for ourselves, because Aaron reached his potential, and it's all that can be asked of anybody. Moving on to lesson number 5. Hashem sets the stage for the Makkot, for the 10 plagues. And what does he say? Of course, there's a role in the Makkot to help the Jews get out of Egypt. Of course, there's a role about the Jews learning about Hashem, which we'll come back to in a few moments. But there's another element, and that is Shmot Perek Zayin Pasuk Hey, V'yadu Mitzrayim Ki Ani Hashem. The Egyptians have to know that I am Hashem. The Egyptians have to know that I'm Hashem. Why do we care about the Egyptians? This is about Am Yisrael. This is about the Jewish people. This is about us leaving Mitzrayim and getting close to Hashem. Why does Hashem say more than once that one of the purposes of these Makkot and the whole experience is that Egypt should know that I am Hashem? There are 2 different answers to this question, and each one is a separate lesson. One is very simply, yes, we do care about the spiritual level of the Gentile world. We know that the Machzor and the Yamim Noraim, what do we say? It's over and over again. We say, V'chein tein pachtacha Hashem Elokeinu al kol ma'asecha, ve'ematcha al kol ma'shebarata, v'yerucha kol hamasim. We are not talking just about the Jewish people recognizing Hashem, but we're talking about all of creation. We say it over and over again. We're asking Hashem that he should be recognized by the entire world and not just by the Jewish people. That is a mission that we have as a Jewish people, to make sure that we bring godliness to the entire world. Yes, we care. The Yadu Mitzrayim, yes, Hashem cares. Hashem wants the Egyptians to know that he exists and wants them to be spiritual. They have their role to play with the 7 mitzvot of Bnei Noach. And we know, Yeshayahu tells us, L'or goyim, we are supposed to be a light unto the nations. Very often we misunderstand what it means when we talk about the Jewish people being the Am HaNivchar. Yes, we are the chosen people, but not chosen in a way of saying that we're greater than others, but chosen it really for responsibility. The whole concept is that we will be a super spiritual people that show the world God. And through that, we are this light that inspires the entire world to be spiritual. So we do care about the spiritual level of the world around us. When we see the world around us being on a low level spiritually, it should impact us and it should motivate us not to proselytize that they should become Jewish, but to make sure that we are messengers bringing God to the world. This Orla Goyim, we care, V'yadu Mitzrayim, Ki Ani Hashem. And that is certainly lesson number 5. Don't close our eyes to what's happening around us, but just the opposite. Let's make sure that we are the type of people who are inspirational to the world around us, and we can have that impact. And that's the Jewish people as a whole, but it's also each one of us as individuals. We can't be accountable for what the entire nation does, but we can hold ourselves to a higher standard for who we are. And let's make sure that we as individuals are Jews who have that responsibility as the Am HaNivchar, and we are showing the people around us in our circles what it means to be spiritual people of God, and hopefully inspire them to do the same. Lesson number 5 from the Parsha. Lesson number 6 continues from this question about V'yadu Mitzrayim. We gave one answer, but there's a second answer, which teaches us another important lesson. And this answer is from the Netivat Shalom. Why is God caring about what happens to Egypt? Says the Netivat Shalom, Tachlit Ratzon Ha'Elyon B'Yetziat Mitzrayim. Why is Hashem bringing the Jewish people out of Egypt? Hayalavila Tikkun Hagamor, to bring the world to a place of completion, of fixing, of correcting the world. Lahaviyam al Har Sinai, to teach them the Torah. The entire purpose of leaving Egypt is to get to Sinai and to have the Torah revealed to the world. And then when the Torah comes into the world can start reaching a point of its tikkun. I think about this all the time because today we use this terminology of tikkun olam, about fixing the world in terms of social justice and the like. And there's nothing wrong with trying to work towards equality and making sure that all people are treated properly and equally. But the original tikkun olam is the Torah and the Jewish people keeping the Torah and the tikkun that brings to the world. And says in Netivat Shalom, as an introduction, as a preparation for this to happen, tzarich hayeh la'avir ruach tumah min ha'aretz. The impurity that existed from the world had to be removed before the holiness of the Torah could be brought to the world. The two don't mix. You can't have the Torah revealed to the world while there is great impurity in the world. And who was the seat of the greatest impurity? V'hayot hamitzrim, Mitzrayim, v'hayta ervat haaretz, makor hatumah. They were the source of impurity in the world. Lekach nidushu kol ha'otot v'hamuftim. We have to have all of these miracles and the Makkot until Mitzrayim also yadu et Hashem. They will know that I am Hashem. Lishbor koach hatumah, to break this impurity. Ka'achana l'krat tikkun, before the tikkun could come of the Torah coming to the world. What an important lesson for us to understand and to internalize. Torah is holiness, and that holiness cannot come into the world, cannot come into a place where there is great impurity. The two just don't mix. And we have to realize that for ourselves as well. Lesson number 6. First of all, as us as individuals, if we want Torah to connect to us, if we want to bring holiness into our lives, we can't do it if we're surrounded by impurity. It just doesn't work. The impurity has to be broken first, and then the Kedusha can enter. And part 2 of that is also in terms of the inspiration to influence the world. We have to recognize that Torah cannot have the impact on us, even us as a Jewish people, if the world around us is filled with impurity. So that's lesson number 6, breaking the impurity inside of us and around us to allow for the Kedusha of the Torah to come in. Let's move on to lesson number 7 as we get to the actual Makkot. Remember, the Makkot that have the role of inspiring the Egyptians, but also certainly for the Jewish people. And before we get into any specific Makkot, we say in the Haggadah that Rabbi Yehuda divided them into 3 sections, right? Datzach, Adash, Be'achav, the first 3 plagues, then the next 3 plagues, and then the final 4 plagues. And there are different commentaries that talk about what can we learn from Rabbi Yehuda doing that. Clearly, he's teaching us a lesson. There's some message in the fact that they're broken up into these 3 groups. There's one answer from Rav Yosef Albo, which I think really hits home for today. And he says, if you look at the first set of the plagues, they were introduced in Zion, with Hashem saying, B'zot teda ki ani Hashem. Through this, you will know that I am Hashem. The first three Makkot, their role is just reinforcing and teaching emunah, belief in Hashem. Category number one. Category number two, introduced in Chet Yud Chet, Laman Teda Ki Ani Hashem Bekerev Haaretz. I am Hashem in the midst of the land. And what does that mean? Not only did Hashem create the world, as we learned from the first three Makkot, but Hashem is involved in the world. Hashgacha pratit, I'm the Bekerev Haaretz. I'm in the midst of the land. Hashgacha pratit, Hashem being involved in our lives. And finally, number three, Tet Chaf Aleph for the last group. What does Hashem say? He said, Lo sam libo el devar Hashem. They have not been listening to the word of Hashem, that Hashem communicates with the world and communicates with us as human beings. Certainly the idea of prophecy and laying the way, paving the way for the Torah to be given to the world, that Hashem gave the Torah at Har Sinai. What is this teaching us? Albo is teaching us there are three fundamental elements that we have to be working on ourselves all the time. Hashem brought the Makkot to teach these to the Jewish people, but we have to work on it for ourselves. And what is that? Emunah, belief in the existence of Hashem. Number two, hashgacha pratit, belief that Hashem is involved in the running of the world. And number three, that Hashem communicates with the world, gives us the Torah, obviously there's prophecy, and gives us messages as individuals as well, if we are in tune to it and watching the messages that Hashem is sending to us. These are three elements that we have to work on ourselves all of the time, and also make sure that we're conveying to the next generations as well, because these are the three fundamental pillars of being the Jewish people, the Am Hashem, and being Ovdei Hashem in the proper way. Emunah, belief in Hashem, Hashgacha Pratit, and Hashem communicating with us in our lifetime and giving us the Torah. Moving on to lesson number 8. There's a fairly well-known lesson that's learned from the Makkot. We have to make sure that we enforce it every time we learn it. We see that Hashem says very clearly when it comes to the plague of blood and frogs, he says, tells Moshe, Emor al Aaron, tell Aaron to hit the Nile. We know before the plague of the Kinim, number 3, he says, Emor al Aaron, tell Aaron to hit the ground. Rashi says on both of them, the first is in Zion Yutet, or al Moshe, because the Nile protected Moshe, therefore Moshe cannot hit the Nile. And then for the Kinim, Rashi says in Chet Yudbet, Moshe could not hit the ground because it protected Moshe when he buried the Egyptian in the ground after he killed the Egyptian who was hurting the Jew. Hakarat HaTov. Unbelievable. Hakarat HaTov, recognizing that's good, doesn't just apply to people, but it applies to inanimate objects. Why? The Nile doesn't care if Moshe hits it or not. The ground doesn't care if Moshe hits it or not. Clearly, we see from over here that Hakarat HaTov is not about the other person, but it's for ourselves. We have to be people who are constantly recognizing the good that others do for us. Says the Midrash in Shemot Rabbah, Daled Bet, talking about the relationship of Moshe and Yitro. When Hashem tells Moshe to go back to Egypt, Moshe says, I have to talk to Yitro about this. I can't just go and leave the home. Says the Midrash, Mishahu poteach pitcho lechavero. If someone opens up their home to someone else, hu chayav lo benafsho. You're chayav, your whole life to that person has to be dedicated to that person. That's what Moshe felt towards Yitro. That is the level of Hakarat HaTov. Someone does something good for you and brings you into their home, you owe your life to them. But why is it so important to the point that we have to even have it towards inanimate objects to make sure that we feel it for ourselves? Says the Midrash Tanchuma in Shmot, hey, kol hakofer b'tovato shel chaveiro. If somebody rejects a good that someone else does for them, says the Midrash, sofo sheyachpor b'tovato shel kadosh baruch hu. You'll end up rejecting the good that Hashem has given to you. And that's talking about the story of Yosef and Paro. Vayakam melech hadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yadat Yosef. He didn't recognize the good that Yosef did. In the end, he says, Lo yadati et Hashem. I don't know Hashem, because that's the way it works. If you're a person who doesn't recognize the good that's done to you in your regular life, you're going to reject the good that's done to you by Hashem. And that is what Rabbeinu Yonah says just about the importance of Hakarat HaTov. You go against Hashem, you should feel pain over that after all that Hashem has done for you. Look at the blessings Hashem has given to you in your life, and you have to be filled with gratitude to Hashem for what he's done. And that is why Hakarat HaTov, and this is lesson number 8, extends even to the inanimate objects. No, the ground won't know, doesn't feel it, doesn't recognize it, the Nile doesn't, but it's for us. We have to be people who are always training ourselves to be recognizing the good, Hakarat HaTov, because ultimately that will lead us to give Hakarat HaTov, recognition to the good that God has given to us, and inspire us to serve Hashem properly, as opposed to the opposite. If we're people who don't recognize the good, then that can lead us to rebel against Hashem and have these horrifying consequences of not recognizing the good that Hashem has done for us. Lesson number 8, let's be people who are constantly makir tov, both to the inanimate and to the live beings around us. And through that, if we recognize that good on a regular basis, we will also have hakarat tov by extension to Hashem, and we'll live lives following the ways of Hashem, recognizing the good that he has given to us. Let's go on to lesson number 9. Lesson number 9 comes from a later Makkot in the Torah, in Perek Tet, Pasuk Chav Tet, where Paro begs Moshe to get rid of the barad immediately. Vayomer I love Moshe kitsetia ta'ir. When I leave the city, I will lift up my hands and the barad will stop. What is that when I leave the city? That's not mentioned in any of the other Makkot that Moshe says to Paro, I have to leave the city. Says Rashi, B'toch ha'ir lo hitpalel. He could not daven inside of the city, because the city was filled with idolatry and Moshe could not pray there. But Moshe prays in other Makkot that they should end. It doesn't mention that he leaves the city. Why? Says the Ramban, 2 possibilities. One possibility is that for all the other Makkot, Moshe prayed in his house that God should get rid of it. But when it came to the barad, he wanted to lift up his hands to the heavens. And to do that, he wanted to go outside. If he's praying outside, he can't do that in the midst of the idolatry. He has to leave the city and go do it outside. Or the Ramban says the other possibility is the other Makkot, there wasn't a prayer that it has to be done immediately. So of course Moshe left the city not to be around the idolatry, but he didn't have to mention it to Paro. But now that Paro is demanding that be done immediately, Moshe says, I can't do it immediately. I can't pray in this environment. I have to leave the city first and then pray. But we see from all of this a really important lesson about tefillah and the place in which we daven. Yes, number one, there are halachot about not davening in a place where there's a bad smell. The Shulchan Aruch and Orach Chaim, Siman Ayin Tet talks about you have to move 4 amot away from any kind of excrement or foul smell behind us. You can't pray with anything that's foul smelling in front of us that we can see. That is one element of the halakha. But the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Tzadi goes further in Sif Yotet and says, Yikvav makom l'tfilato v'lo yishanehu anu im lo l'tzarech. You should have a set place for your davening, a place where you know you can have good, solid kavanah, and you should not change that place unless you need to. Says the Mishnah Berurah, even in your own house. You should have a set place where you pray so that the people in your home won't disturb you. The environment, the place where you pray is very significant. Moshe Rabbeinu left Egypt. He could not pray around idolatry. You just can't start davening anywhere. You have to be in a place which is in some way gives the ability to have kavanah, to have the holiness of davening. It has to be set for that. And that's why we leave there's a foul smell. That's why you should have a set place where you know you can have a kavanah. Let's remember that davening is not just saying the words, but it's connecting to Hashem. And for that, you have to have an environment that's conducive towards connecting to Hashem, and that is lesson number 9. Let's go through all the lessons that we learned from this week's Parsha. We started with lesson number 1, Elokim, and then Hashem, when God is giving Musar. When we give Musar, on the one hand, yes, you have that harsh rebuke, but also the softness and the appeasement and the love. The two have to go together. As Rav Moshe says, a special lesson for Rabbanim and for teachers. Also, we can certainly extend it to parents as well. Lesson number 2, the path of tshuva, following the 4 languages of redemption from Egypt. Number 1, v'hotzeiti, just stop doing the act. Number 2, v'hitzalti, then you can address the inner workings of why you're doing the act. Number 3, v'ga'alti, start doing the positive. And then finally, you'll have that relationship with Hashem. V'lakachti, Hashem takes you close to him. That is the path we have to take. First and foremost, stopping the behavior, which can then set us on the path for tshuva. Lesson number 2. Lesson number 3, the fact that it gives the years for Levi and for all the generations leading up to Moshe. We have it for Levi, and we have it for Kahat, and we have it for Amram. The impact that grandparents can have on their grandchildren and future generations. Let's be involved in the lives of our children and our grandchildren. And through those efforts, hopefully we too can be blessed with a Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam to come from those efforts. Lesson number 4, it said, Hu Aaron and Moshe. And the Tosefta said they are equal. How are they equal? Moshe was greater. No, says Moshe Feinstein, because Aaron did the best that he could do. Recognize for ourselves that we can only do what our potential is, which we have to know and learn for ourselves, and certainly educate our children and students the same way. Strive for your potential, and you're equal to even people who might reach greater heights because they were given the opportunity for more potential. Be the best that we can be. That is lesson number 4. Lesson number 5, the Yadu Mitzrayim. The Egyptians have to know there's a God. 2 elements. Lesson number 5 was, yes, we do care about the spiritual welfare of the nations around us. That is our mission as the Am HaNivchar, as the Or LaGoyim. Let's make sure that we do care about the spiritual level of people around us. Even if they are not Jewish, we do care about their spiritual level and want to inspire them to get close to God. And lesson number 6, for the Tivat Shalom, Torah cannot enter in a place where there's impurity. God had to get rid of the impurity of Egypt first, and then the Torah could come to the world. That's the way it has to be for us as individuals. Get rid of the impurity. Then Torah can impact us and certainly the world around us as well. Lesson number 7, break the Makkot into 3 groups. Rav Albo, number 1, teaching emunah in Hashem. Number 2, hashgacha pratit, that God's involved in running the world. Number 3, that God communicates with us and with the world. Let's reinforce those elements of emunah on a regular basis for ourselves and our families, as the Makkot accomplished for the Jewish people. Lesson number 8, hakarat hatov, even to inanimate objects. Moshe was sensitive to it. Ultimately, recognizing the good of all those around us and even the inanimate objects leads us to Hakarat Hatov of Hashem, or God forbid the opposite. If we're not in tune to it, it can lead us to not recognizing the good Hashem has given to us. We've been given so much blessing by Hashem. Let that be an inspiration and a springboard to serve Hashem properly, to be people of Hakarat Hatov in general, and to Hashem. And finally, lesson number 9, Moshe had to leave the city, leave the idolatry to pray to God. Let's make sure that when we daven, we are in an environment and a mindset which enables us to connect to Hashem properly, and that tefillah will really be an experience which brings us closer to Hashem. 9 lessons that we can learn from this week's Parsha. Let's try to internalize either one of them or all of them, and let's all of us, B'ezrat Hashem, be blessed with a Shabbat Shalom filled with spiritual growth from Parshat Va'eira.